Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs. What's the fastest way to beat in a disc? Let's find out.
Today, we'll be testing a bunch of different methods to see what's the fastest way to beat in a disc. But why? Well, picture this. It's the day before the big A tier at your local course, and you're practicing the water carry hole.
Dude, you're gonna throw your perfectly beat-in driver over the water? You're nuts.
Dude, this thing's never let me down before. It's money. No. What am I gonna do? The tournament's tomorrow.
The only thing worse than losing your perfectly beat-in disc is to do it right before a big tournament and not have a backup ready to go. So we reached out to you, our YouTube community, to ask what would you do in this scenario? And we had some amazing suggestions. But before we get to those suggestions, I want to say a big thank you to that community. You see, last year we went to the Disc Golf Pro Tour for the first time and set up our pop-up shop in the vendor area at the LWS Open at Idlewild. See, we were just hoping to sell a few discs, see the pros up close, and just have a good time for the weekend. But what happened was so many of you came up to our tent just to say hello and say how much you enjoyed our content, and that means a lot. But this August, we're coming back, and this time we're more prepared. If you're one of the first 100 people to come up to our tent and say hello and show us that you're subscribed to our YouTube channel, you will receive one of these, our Six-Sided Discs Velcro patch for free. And I want to say a big shout out and thanks to discgolfpins.com for making these for us. They turned out fantastic. So if you're ever in need of a pin or patch or anything else about disc golf, head over to discgolfpins.com. Not a sponsor. And of course, we'll see you at Idlewild. Now, before we start testing all these different methods of beating in a disc, let's talk about what actually happens when a disc beats in. Nearly all plastics are susceptible to something called polymer degradation. Polymer degradation refers to a reduction in physical properties, often caused by heat, light, air, water, and of course, in the world of disc golf, we also add in the physical stress of throwing discs into trees and concrete and metal and so on. All of these can cause major chemical changes like oxidation or chain scission, leading to a reduction in the molecular weight and polymerization of the polymer. These changes affect physical properties like strength, malleability, melt flow index, appearance, and color, all terms that I obviously understand. Okay, I may not totally understand the science, but anyone that's thrown a disc that used to be overstable and is now super understable understands the practical effects of this process. Now, in order to put this to the test, we're going to need some actual discs to beat in. And here they are, some Z-Swirl Zeus from a recent Ledgestone release from Discraft. The Zeus is a distance driver that shares its flight numbers of 12.5, -1.3 with the daddy of all distance drivers, the Innova Destroyer, and we'll be doing some before and after comparisons to see how these fly. Let's jump into our testing with method number 1, the hammer and anvil, or to be specific, rubber mallet, because I'm not trying to destroy this disc, I'm just trying to beat it in. Now remember, the scenario that we're in means that the clock is ticking. The tournament is tomorrow morning, and we have a couple hours at most to get this disc ready. Because of course, I need time for my pre-tournament routine of drinking ramen broth, winking at my poster of Paul Macbeth, and fist bumping my dogs for good luck. So the idea here with method number 1 is to gently hit the disc with a hammer against the anvil, but you could probably use any really hard surface. You're going to turn the disc each time to still leave a smooth edge, and according to the person who suggested this, quote, a couple minutes should equate to a couple months of use. And since my seasoned driver was in my bag for 5 months, I'll hit it for 5 minutes. All right, 5 minutes later, let's see how that Zeus flew before. Fairly overstable. And now after. Definitely a little bit more turn. Now I do want to mention the conditions before we judge these flights. Both days that we threw these discs, we had a mild left to right headwind, but obviously other factors can contribute to the flight here, like temperature and humidity. So it's important to remember all of that while we draw our conclusions. So with all that being said, the hammer and anvil was somewhat effective, as we did see quite a bit of turn from a disc that had almost none when we started. However, not everyone has a hammer and anvil lying around, so this may not be the most realistic option for most people. Next, let's move on to a method that probably is more practical and realistic: throwing your disc against a hard surface. Now, for throwing a disc against a wall or floor or whatever, I think it should go without saying that you should make sure that that's your wall or floor, or that you have permission to do this, and that you're not damaging someone else's property, please. And if you don't have a wall available, you can obviously opt for a garage or basement floor, driveway, sidewalk, something like that. And the suggestion here was to give the disc a good 10 to 20 full power throws into that surface, something that you can do very quickly. And I'm going to be throwing this with some like spiked thumbers and forehands into my garage floor. Keep in mind that if you use a rougher surface like asphalt, sidewalk, cinder block, you're going to get deeper gouges in the plastic. Now for this test, we're using this kind of yellow-green Zeus, and here's how it flew before we started. Pretty overstable.
I knocked the price sticker off.
And how does it fly after all that? Honestly, not that different. My guess here is that it just didn't do all that much damage to the rim. I can feel that it's like a little bit rougher, but there aren't any like deep scratches or gouges or even much deformation to the plastic. The garage floor is really smooth, and so I think what's happening when it hits that smooth surface is it just kind of scoots down onto the flight plate or onto the rim, and it's not actually impacting the rim or the edge of the rim all that hard. So while it's easy enough for most people to throw a disc into the ground, it didn't prove very effective for us. Method number 3, hit a bunch of trees. This is of course the most traditional, natural way most discs are going to get beat in, just by hitting trees over and over. But the question is, how many tree kicks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop or beat in plastic? Well, for testing this method, I recommend caution. You don't want to just be going out there hurting perfectly good trees. Even if they're trees on your local course, that wouldn't be very cool. Which is why we're using a tree that's actually scheduled to be cut down so it doesn't fall on my in-laws' house. A couple other factors to consider here. Tree bark is rough, you're going to get some deeper scratches and gouges, and it might be worth using maybe a tree that's already fallen or a piece of a tree that's already fallen down that still has bark on it. And let's take a quick look at our tree disc next to the garage floor disc. And while the garage floor disc has very little visible damage to the rim, this tree disc has a lot more really rough edges. But of course what matters most is how it flies. Before the trees, this red Zeus was not that overstable. It flipped to flat, held, and then faded out. But afterwards, it gets a big turn. But it does still have enough low speed fade to fight out. Not bad. So far, it seems throwing into trees is more effective than our first two methods, and pretty realistic, provided you aren't just out there hurting random trees. Not bad. Let's take a look at method number 4. Find an out-of-the-box replacement. Or in other words, throw newer discs instead of perfectly seasoned discs. Now this was a real suggestion that we got. Apparently the idea is that you shouldn't rely on perfectly seasoned discs because they're really hard to replace. There's a lot of risk in having any one disc that you rely on in your bag that you don't have a replacement for. But honestly, this idea doesn't really make for a super informative and fun, entertaining YouTube video. So let's move on to something more interesting, the dryer. Now this is an interesting suggestion for a few reasons. Let me read you the recipe here. The instructions are to put your disc in the dryer with towels on high for 10 minutes. Then bend the disc 20 to 100 times depending on the plastic, 100 for premium. Then set it on a hard surface for 10 to 20 minutes to cool, and repeat that process until you get the desired flight. And while this does sound odd and maybe very specific, it kind of makes sense if you go back to that sciencey stuff we talked about earlier. Heat, physical stress, all sort of rolled into one. Could work. Here we've got our wet towels, toss the disc in, 10 minutes on high, and let's bend it. And just to see if this method has any merit, let's do it twice.
All right, straight out of the dryer. Here we go. Ooh, that's actually kind of hot. There we go.
Now, when we threw this Zeus before it went in the dryer, it was pretty overstable. But after all that, you can see it gets quite a bit of turn. By far one of the biggest changes in stability we've seen. So we're gonna have to say most people have a dryer, so this is very realistic, and based on that flight, it's also very effective. 2 thumbs up to the dryer. And let's move on to method number 6, and yes, this was a real suggestion. Stare at it really mean and call it bad names. And I'll be completely honest, I kind of struggled with this because I don't like confrontation and I'm not a very mean person. But I gave it my best shot.
Where did you get that stamp? The toilet store? I bet you've never even seen an ace. You suck, Zeus. You wouldn't even know how to fade in Photoshop. Look at you, you stupid guy with a cigar and hair. Nobody cares about Greek mythology. Look at you being all round. You suck. Ah! Ah!
And I mean, looking at the disc closely, it doesn't look very beat in, but does it fly different? It's the same. Moving on. Now to method number 7, throw the disc 5,000 times into solid objects. And I mean, honestly, what kind of maniac would do this? Like, it's crazy. No one has time for this, although it is extremely effective. But not at all realistic. Moving on to a method that you could actually do in one evening before a tournament, hot and cold. Now, I find this method particularly interesting because there's a lot of debate online about how and where to store your discs. I've heard of people's discs getting warped when left in their trunk on a hot summer day. I've heard that the plastic will break down if you leave it in your garage in the winter and they get too cold. So to simulate both of these, we put the disc in this cooler of ice water and then into the oven on the warm setting, which is a toasty 100 degrees Fahrenheit or so, back and forth, as many times as we could in about an hour. And let me tell you, this disc was rock hard from the ice water in no more than 1 to 2 minutes, and it was hot to the touch after just a few minutes in the oven. So it made a good 10 to 15 cycles between these over the course of an hour. Now, if I were this disc, I'd have a wicked headache right now, but let's see how it flies. Now, before conducting the test, thrown on hyzer and admittedly slightly nose up, this purple Zeus was pretty overstable. And afterwards, still on hyzer and still slightly nose up, you can see it flips and turns over for a moment before fading out. And I'd say this is one of the most surprising results to me. It's a simple test, it doesn't require any physical stress, and just about anyone has access to the things they need to do it. So, super realistic and somewhat effective. But that takes us to the end of the suggestions that you all gave me, but while reviewing them, I had an idea. You see, when I was a kid growing up in the 90s, everyone played baseball. Or t-ball, at least. And I played t-ball just the one time. It was great. I sat in center field, I picked some flowers, this ball would like land next to me and somebody would come over and pick it up and wag their finger at me and seem upset, and then they'd leave or whatever and I'd pick some more flowers. It was great. But before I played the game or picked any flowers, my dad bought me my first baseball glove. And then he did something strange. Instead of us going out to the yard and throwing the ball back and forth, he parked our car on it. And apparently there's a long tradition of people doing strange things to work in or beat in a baseball glove before they use it because they're too stiff. So that's basically what we're going to do. We're going to run over this disc with this here Honda Pilot, and hopefully it survives so that we can actually throw it. And for this one, we're going to use the green Zeus for all the people that have said they don't want a green disc in the order instructions on our website. And after about an hour's worth of running it over and then parking on it and then running it over some more, it flew like this. Wow. I have to say, this baseball glove method really blew me away. I honestly expected it to be way more damaged than it is. It just had some small dents from rough spots on the asphalt of my driveway. However, I would not suggest this method for trying to work in or beat in a mid-range or putter. I think the deeper rim and that like more rounded edge is going to take a beating from something like this. So parking your car on a disc was surprisingly effective. And since most people have cars, pretty realistic too. But I'm curious, what did y'all think of all these methods? Would you try one of these yourself on a brand new $20 to $25 premium plastic disc? Or is that a little too risky? Comment below if you've ever found yourself in a similar position, in need of a beat-in disc on short notice, and what you did to beat it in. And also comment below other methods of beating in plastic that we should test. Remember, the plastic is in the details. For Six-Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one.
Let's find out. Oops.
I really wish I could think of mean things to say, but I'm not a very mean person.
But this August, we're coming back, and we are more prepared. Prepared?
All right, straight out of the dryer. Oh, it's really hot. It's really hot. Oh, that is so stiff.
That's what she said.
Crazy.
Oh no, I didn't mean to throw it. It slipped out of my hand. I was just gonna pretend to throw it. Crap, that's bad.
Your retriever's gonna get it out.
Okay, well, what am I gonna do? The tournament's tomorrow. All right.
If you like this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video, subscribing to our channel, or supporting us on Patreon. Your support makes this content possible.